So y'all are good to go.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rachel. We're so excited to be presenting here at SEAHO. We are members of SEAHO and we are from the University of South Carolina. We love that we're able to keep it in Carolina today with Rachel Muzingo serving as our moderator. And we're just really excited to talk to you about a topic that has had a lot of relevance and certainly has come top of mind for us as we have navigated through this season, particularly as we think about COVID and certainly the additional demands placed on housing professionals during this time. And we're really excited to share some stories, help orient you to what this particular mindset of essentialism is and how you might go about applying it to your personal and or your professional life. So if you don't mind, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. What we are really focused on today is helping you understand more about essentialism and understanding that it is a mindset. It is something that you are able to incorporate in your own life, whether that's personal or professional. It has applications that are beyond the professional sphere, although it was a book that kind of was written by someone who is really focused on kind of business and Fortune 500 companies. It's a really cool application into our own personal and professional lives and kind of bringing it into the higher ed sphere to critically examine some of the concepts and really think about how you could, if you chose to, really implement some of the tenets of this into your own life. It's also important that you assess and evaluate your own readiness and maybe your own capacity for essentialism in your professional practice. We don't want you walking away from this presentation thinking that the answer is to say no to everything or to do less for the sake of doing less, but it's really about trying to determine where you can have the biggest impact and how you can create a shared language to talk about that with supervisors, with supervisees, with advisees, with peers, and with your team in whatever context you are working within the field of higher education and certainly in housing as well. And then finally, we really want you to walk away with some ways to create your own professional or personal commitment plan using some of the concepts that we're going to be presenting today. So we have some resources available for you that we will share at the end of the presentation, and we'll also do some application work here within our presentation as well. So we will do a bit of individual reflection and some activities that might really help you to determine what essentialism is and how it can be applied in your life and in your context. So we're going to start with who we are. It's always a great place to start. My name is Tiffany Conde. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am from the University of South Carolina, where I have served as the Assistant Director of Residential Leadership Initiatives for the past 4 years, almost 5. Time flies when you're having fun. And how I came to essentialism was really when I started at Carolina. So we had the opportunity to go to, at that time, it was, an institute on kind of the residential curriculum experience. And so now known as ICA, and I had the opportunity to attend during my first year so that I could really learn more about the curricular approach. And one of the concepts presented there, and one of the books that was recommended to participants was Essentialism, and it's by McKeown. And it was written in 2014, so it was kind of newish, kind of hot off the presses for us. And it was a really exciting opportunity. I just picked it up on a whim when I got home. I thought, you know what, I think I'll give this a read. This seems like a pretty quick book to read, seems very digestible. And I was drawn to, just sort of the illustrations inside of it being really modern and crisp and clear. And really, it was such an easy read for me to work through on a weekend. And at the time, I'll share that, I was orienting to a new role. I was coming into a place where I had the opportunity to make a lot of change in the processes that I was running, but I felt very much like everything was a priority, that training, RA training and RA selection and RA development and RHA and NRHH, that getting them up to speed and getting them where the department really wanted them, all of that was such a tremendous priority. And it was really hard for me at that time to assess what was kind of going to be the place where I could have the greatest impact, and how would I orient myself to all of that work, and making sure that I could manage it and really make sure that I could still thrive in that space and that I could still be well. And so reading the Essentialist book was something that I couldn't put down. It really helped me to reframe some of my ways of working. And at the time, Dr. Hilary Lichterman, who's going to be next on the stage, was my supervisor. And so to really have conversations with her about how I could apply this to my work for the benefit of our students and for the benefit of our department was just such a game changer for me. So we'll get into that a little bit more, but wanted to let you know a little bit about who I am and how I came to this topic of essentialism.
Wonderful. Good morning, everyone. It's so good to be together in shared company for SEAHO 2021. I wish that we were hugging and high-fiving in person, but that'll give us a lot to look forward to next year. And good morning, Tiffany from down the hall. So my name is Dr. Hilary Lichterman. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I serve as the Senior Associate Director of Residence Life here at the University of South Carolina. I have been in my role now in my 11th year, which is wild, hard to believe. And, you know, like Tiffany said, we talk about this all the time. And we kind of have that shared, you know, we'll look at each other in a meeting sometime and have that shared in the eye of like, ooh, this is essentialism in action. You know, much like Tiffany, I learned about it at that institute, and a dear mentor, Dr. Keith Edwards, who's also a life coach and professional coach. He kind of, you know, talks the lingo and language of this. And some of the wisdom, as we all know, the power of having mentors in our lives, it can be found, you know, just in those nuggets. This is something, when I think about essentialism, I read the book. I have the book right here on my desk. I read it once a year for sure. That's a staple commitment. But I think about it every single day, pretty consciously. And Tiffany talked about at work, you know, some examples there, but I also think, and we'll talk about and get your thoughts, that there's so much that applies to our life, because first, we're human beings, right? We're passionate about the work we do, but we are also people too. So when I think about, you know, a fitness journey I was on last year, I had to make some very intentional decisions about how I was spending my time and other priorities, and how I was going to use finances or not to really help that come to be. I thought about this a lot when I was in school for the PhD program and balancing full-time work and trying to be a somewhat modern human being and have, you know, friends and life. So I think I just really would encourage you to think about your whole being, not only the work that you love doing, but also your whole entire life, your hopes, your dreams, your wishes, because I think this is powerful stuff that may not seem revolutionary as we get a little bit more into it, but it's almost kind of obvious. So we'll get your thoughts too.
Fantastic.
Great. So we'd love if you'd like to use the chat feature. It's always so nice to know who's with us. You know, who are you, your pronouns, where you are from, whether that's an institution or a company, maybe you're a vendor, and what drew you to this space. We'd love to know if, you know, you've read Essentialism, or if you've heard of it, or just, you know, whatever you'd like to share, but please do, so we can try to build some virtual community here. Just drop that right in the chat. And you can feel free to do that. And we invite you throughout the session to use the chat. We know sometimes, you know, you have a thought, or you want to throw out a question or give an example or affirm something someone's saying. By all means, go ahead and do that. And we'll try to attend to that. And Rachel, thank you as well, because we don't want to miss if anyone has a question or a comment. So, ooh, love it. So nice to meet everyone. But we'll let you do that, and we'll scoot ahead to get into more of the meat and potatoes.
And so, you know, we are talking about essentialism. We've already alluded to this book. We've alluded to this concept. This is the book that you can see on your screen. It's the book you're probably not reading, but we hope after maybe interacting with us through this session and hearing what we have taken away from it and how we have incorporated it into our professional and personal lives, that maybe it does make it onto your reading list. And maybe it is a book that you look forward to picking up or borrowing from someone, or maybe checking out of the library as well. And so this is what it looks like. It was published in 2014. A little bit about Greg McKeown. He went to Stanford MBA. program. He works with a number of Fortune 500 companies, and he has also been involved in teams doing research on really why some teams succeed and why others do not. And he has his own podcast on this topic. If it's available wherever you get your podcasts, it is a really great resource, and they're pretty short sessions, and he brings in a lot of different folks from not just business, but also from a lot of different industries as well, and really thinking about how they apply this topic to their own lives. And so it's a really great read. It's very quick, and it's something that we hope maybe you'll consider picking up after this session and learning a little bit more about, as we can't do it justice in just 50 minutes, but we want to give you a little bit of an entree, appetizer into what essentialism is all about. And so if you would, just kind of humor us, we want to give you a 10-second intro into essentialism. And we really want to help you ground and get ready for the content that we're going to present here in this space. And so what I would love for you to do is just stop what you're doing. So whatever you're doing, I want you to just stop what you're doing. And if you feel comfortable, I'd love for you to close your eyes. So go ahead and close your eyes. And take a deep breath in through your nose. Kind of hold it in your chest for a couple of seconds, and then release it out through your mouth. And I want you to ask yourself, what's important now? What's important now in this moment for me? Whether that's personal or professional, what's important now? And so I hope that you have your thought about what's important now, your kind of win for the day. And really what essentialism is all about is, in any given moment, taking the time, making the space to determine what is important now for me. Really being mindful about creating that space for yourself and being connected to what's important, being connected to what's your why. And then taking deliberate action to move towards that thing that is your win, that is important to you, and eliminating as much as possible the distractions and the rest of it, the static and the noise. And so that's really your entry into essentialism. And so at least I hope you have for right now what is most important to you in this moment. And what I hope that gives you is a very quick grounding exercise that you can use when you are in the midst of all those emails. I'm sure you have notifications popping up on your screen right now. We're all kind of at work and trying to manage also being engaged and involved in this conference. We all have competing priorities, and really thinking about, how can I stay connected every day to what's important for me now?
Great. So you're hopefully at this point, and thank you for taking the time to introduce yourselves in the chat. Again, feel free to use that throughout the session. By now, you're probably thinking, okay, let's really get into it. So what we want to do is, we found a great video. There's a lot online. So if I can't recall if Tiffany mentioned this, we are not getting a cut on Greg McKeown's book. So we are promoting his resources, but there is no cut there. So there's a lot of great stuff on the internet. He's got his 21-day challenge. I like to do that occasionally, but we're going to roll into a video to hear from him just briefly, and then start getting into some definitions and, most importantly, practical application.
The justification for slowing down, becoming more deliberate, becoming more focused is single, and it's this. If you really believe that a few things are exceptionally valuable and most other things are noise, then you will automatically, naturally start to change your behavior. It's about what matters most to you in life. It's not just about less, it's about essential things, essential relationships, essential living. Most of the stuff that's going on is not vital. It's a trivial many versus the vital few.
We sometimes forget that we have a choice. We make decisions impulsively, say yes before we think it through, and burden ourselves with commitment. The end result, we feel overworked, overwhelmed, and stretched too thin. Greg McKeown is the author of the New York Times bestselling book, Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less. In the book, Greg describes an approach similar to minimalism that gets us to take stock of our lives and ask the right questions about where we're spending our time, energy, and effort. He first started thinking about these ideas when he noticed his priorities in life had shifted, seemingly without his control.
One of the experiences that led me to really focus on this subject in this book was that, I got an email from my colleague at the time said, look, Friday would be a very bad time for your wife to have a baby because I need you to be at this client meeting between 1 and 2. And look, and I'm sure they were joking, and yet somehow I took it as a responsibility, a burden. I got to navigate this, balance this. Friday comes along, that is when we're in the hospital. My wife's just had our daughter. Instead of being focused, I allow another passion, another interest to confuse it. And so I go, to my shame, to the meeting. And even if some great thing had come from that meeting, which in fact it didn't, surely and clearly I made a fool's bargain. What I learned from that lesson is the simplest idea, which is if you don't prioritize your life, someone else will. That idea of heightened awareness of what the priority is and making sure that we aren't just busy pursuing lots of things, but that we are creating space to actually pause and discern and make sure that we're sleeping enough so that our discernment is intact, so that we can keep on figuring out what is the most important contribution I can make. And so that's what I'm saying. I say there's an inherent trade-off. When people are just, I'm so interested in this, I'm so passionate, I'm going to do more of everything. Yeah, there's an advantage to that for a time, perhaps. But you're giving up something along the way as well. And you have to be careful about what you're giving up. Because otherwise you wake up one day and you say, my goodness, I've done all these different things, but I basically lost my way. I don't know what it is anymore that I want to do. And you're so consumed, and you've been so consumed, and this happens for years for people's lives, and then they go, why am I even doing this? And they got disconnected.
Finding what is essential to our lives is becoming more and more difficult as our world has become more distracting. The tools that we use to be productive can just as easily be used to pacify us. And when we travel with them 24/7, bringing them into bed with us, the truly important things can get lost with the non-essential. And in many ways, this behavior is encouraged. Busyness has become a badge of honor. Hustle.
Okay, so that is just a brief clip. We will wanted you to hear from him directly. We'll be happy to share so that you can hear the rest of that. But some pretty powerful stuff, right? Like, and not all of us are waiting on the call to welcome a new human to the world, but that's big stuff, right? And we all have important people, important priorities in our lives, in addition to in our work. So when we think about essentialism, we really have to think about what is this value proposition. And this may not be a word or a phrase that we use in our everyday work, but as we advance and we grow as professionals and as humans, it's important that we can articulate this and that we can know our own, stance and what we mean by that. And so I really do want to read this because it's very powerful, that only once you give yourself permission to stop trying to do it all, to stop saying yes to everyone and everything, you can make your highest contribution to the things that really matter. Now there's a lot there, right? And it makes you feel good and it really makes you feel empowered, but there are some cautionary tales embedded in that. We hope that you maybe jump or flinch a little bit when you read that, because, as Tiffany mentioned very eloquently at the top of the session, we can't say no to everything. You can't say to your boss, I'm not going to be doing that. Thank you very much. Or you may not say, to your uncle, I really can't come to your birthday because, this or that, right? So it is important to think about, what is your foundation and how are you making these decisions? So going forward.
And that's an excellent point, Hilary. And I'd love to kind of offer a real life example of that from my own work. And I, think back to, maybe about 2.5 years ago, when I was kind of relatively new in the position, really being pulled in a lot of different directions to, kind of revolutionize a lot of our different processes and try to make them different and more efficient and effective, but then also that they would have a learning lens to them and would be student-centered at the same time. And, I just found it really overwhelming, the amount and the volume of the work that I was experiencing at that time in my role. And, there were things that I knew I couldn't control. I knew I, had to go to certain committee meetings, and I knew I had to be at certain events and things related to my work. But where I really found the opportunity and the way that I think that I applied essentialism well was really to stop and think about of all these different priorities of RHA and NRHH and RM training and RM selection and all of these different things that are kind of wrapped into my role. Where can I make the highest contribution, and how can I try to move towards that and eliminate some of the static and help others join me in that quest and join me in that process. And so really, it was about focusing on the elements that I could control. And it was really a mindset shift for me of no longer thinking, oh, I'm out of control of this entire experience. There are a number of elements that I can control. And so for me, it was about applying essentialist mindset into our student staff training program. Our student staff training program had been 3 weeks long. It had been 8 hours a day, every day. And that was tiresome for the staff. It was tiresome for our students. No one was retaining information, and our assessment data revealed that. And so really thinking about what is it that we want our RAs to learn in that space, and what is the best way for them to learn it, to think about how we could make that a more lean process, but still be focused on the essential elements, which for us were, we need them to learn how to do the work of an RM successfully within the first 6 weeks of that position. And so for that was a lot of community building, it's a lot of relationship building. It's certainly crisis focused. And then it's also team and individual supervisor development. And so really applying that essentialist mindset allowed us to move our training from a 3-week long extravaganza where we were teaching them things that they didn't need to know at that point in their time. It wasn't just in time training for them. And really being able to move it down to, about 9 days and thinking about how we could space this content out over time, how we could move the class, how we could use our RM class to move some of our training content so that they would get the content at the time when they needed it and they actually had the real practical application so that they wouldn't just forget the concept. And what we saw was much more engagement. We saw much more, higher satisfaction, but really what we saw was better retention of the material. And so, thinking about those ways where there may not always be a space where you can be in the position to say no, but how can you apply an essentialist mindset and framework to the things that you are in control of and the responsibilities that you have in your role? And how can you do that for the benefit of yourself to kind of manage that a little bit better, but then also the benefit of the people and the students and the department that you serve?
And you think about professional development, right? And for many, there are still parts of your journey thus far that you might still be experiencing. Maybe it's advising a fraternity or a sorority that you are a member of, right? While you're still in graduate school and a professional. It might be involvement in wonderful SEAHO, right? We love SEAHO and there's so many ways to get involved. It could be involvement on a campus committee that maybe is adjacent to maybe your direct position responsibilities. Life is full, right? And we don't want to be boring people. We want to have hobbies and lives and kind of have that wherewithal in addition to what we bring to our roles. So it's important to think about too. I mean, we hear a lot of advice and wisdom of we have 30, 40 years left in our careers. You don't have to do everything this year, right? You don't have to be on every committee or partake in every experience. But there might be some experiences that after careful thought, you think really do help you do a better job in your role for students. It's getting you in information and resources and access that does do that. And there might be other experiences that it's time to sunset. I just recently stepped away from some involvement in a local organization. It's not that that doesn't still speak to my heart, it sure does, but it just wasn't a place that I was able to continue to have my highest point of contribution when I thought about other places of contribution right now. So it's not that it doesn't come with emotion, it's not that it doesn't come with trade-offs, but that's exactly it. Everything is a trade-off and does warrant careful review. So moving forward.
And, you know, I love Hilary's point about kind of the trade-offs that can be associated with essentialism once you have defined your highest point of contribution. So we've talked about this, we've alluded to this a couple of times, and we really want to help you define that for yourself. It is personal to you. I can't tell you what your highest point of contribution is in the same way that you wouldn't be able to tell me what mine is, but you can define it for yourself. And so when you operate from a non-essentialist perspective, which is, I think, for many folks, the default perspective, it is for many of us the only perspective we have ever known. And so there's no value judgment in operating from that space. You operate from the place where you know, and you hope to do better, and you hope to do differently. But when you operate from that space, really what you might find is the graphic on the left-hand side of the screen, right? So it's those three, that Venn diagram, those three interlocking circles. When you think about your tasks, the things that you have in your professional and personal life, everything is what you're doing. You are doing everything now, and you're doing it because it's popular, or you're doing it because you feel like it needs to be done. You often don't feel like you have much choice in that space. And where those three circles intersect, it creates this highest point of frustration. It creates this place where burnout becomes really real, becomes a real threat. I think many of us have experienced that, or felt that they were burned out, or were on the edge of it. It's a hard place to be when you feel like there are just so many competing demands and so much noise and static that you can't cut through it, and you can't see clearly the pathway forward. And so that's where you might be if you're at that highest point of frustration. The good litmus test for that is, am I busy but not productive? Do I feel busy but not productive? I can point to places in my career where that has been true. And, you know, really thinking about creating a space and creating space for me to focus on what my highest point of contribution was a real challenge for me. And so when I was asked to do that through reading the book, I kind of struggled initially. And we have some exercises a little bit later that will help you through that. But I think that, you know, on the essentialist side of it, so if you look on the right-hand side of the slide, what you can see is when you're working from an essentialist perspective, you're defining where your highest point of contribution is, where you can do the most good. And you're really thinking about, what am I doing? I'm doing the right thing. Why am I doing it? For the right reason. And when am I doing it? I'm doing it at the right time. And I'm trying as best that I can to reduce or eliminate the distractors that keep me from being able to kind of serve at my highest point of contribution. The way that I use this in my own professional life now is certainly in the way that I supervise the coordinators that I work with and the students that I get to advise through RHA and NRHH. It really is important for me to ask them this question of, you know, what is important for you and where do you want to go big on the things that you have in your tasks, right? We look through your position description. We have a good understanding of what it is that you're doing on a day-to-day, but where do you think you can create that biggest impact, where you can make the biggest contribution, and when you feel aligned with the work that you're doing. So you're doing the right thing for the right reason at the right time. It is so critical for me as a supervisor to know that so that I can support them. My biggest goal as a supervisor is always to support and challenge the folks that I get to work alongside and to learn from them, and also to impart some knowledge. And so something that I have done now, I think, to improve my professional practice is really being considerate of my staff's highest points of contribution and where they feel like they are, you know, doing the best possible work within the bounds of their position, and being able to help them remove barriers, obstacles, and unnecessary distractions that keep them from really contributing at the highest level in our organization. And I think, as Hilary said, we've got a quote here from Greg, the author of the book. It's not about how to get more things done. It really is about getting the right things done, and making sure that those things are aligned with your core and with your values. And it doesn't mean just doing less for the sake of doing less. It really is about it's about your time and energy. And so it's really about taking stock of where your time and energy is, helping to protect yourself as an asset, and really making sure that you're making the wisest possible decisions and investment of your time and energy, to contribute at the highest point that you can, by doing what is essential and trying to eliminate or reduce the places where you are distracted. So prioritization is something that I think about a lot with Essentialism, and really thinking about how does this task, how does this opportunity, how does this committee, how does this project really align with my highest point of contribution, and how can I shift myself towards that? And sometimes it does mean saying no to things if you're able to. And sometimes it does mean, trying to think about the places where you do have control and trying to bring in this essentialist mindset. What I think is most important for us to think about here is that you now have a common language to discuss this with others, that you can talk about this with your supervisor, you can talk about this with your peers and your staff. It would be great. I know budgets are tight, but this might be a great thing to think about for a professional development opportunity. You don't need to buy the book. You could certainly, have folks listen to a couple snippets of a podcast, watch a couple videos, and do this on a really low barrier type of professional development work without buying the book. And so I think that the book is fantastic, and you can see one of the illustrations from the book here on the right-hand side of the screen, but really thinking about how this is a mindset shift of what a non-essentialist versus an essentialist thinks, does, and gets. The biggest thing I think for me was always thinking about how can I fit it all in, and really reframing that to think about what are the trade-offs. Every decision that I make is going to have some sort of trade-off. And I have to really decide what is the problem that I want to have and how does it align with what I'm trying to do. It really helped me stay connected to my why in a way that I don't think I was connected to it before. And so really thinking about how you can bring in these principles into your own personal and professional life is what we're going to focus on for the the remainder of our presentation.
And when I think about, with this model in the book, like Tiffany said, there are a lot of fun, drawings and just, ways to bring this to life in a different dimension. I think about, that top part there with the messy ball and all the, scribbles all over to the tightly wound this in a nice little package. And I think it's really important that in this approach, you also take the time to do some good personal and organizational scanning. Where is there noise? And where is it that the little voice inside your head needs some heavy duty duct tape? And Greg talks a lot about the shoulds, things that you should be thinking or should be doing. And so again, it's very thought provoking to think about what are the shoulds and what are your choices? What are the environmental conditions that you can change? And we all know that can be far, it can be very far reaching. It's certainly, your mentors, it is your colleagues, it's how you engage with others in the profession. On a personal level, it's how you prioritize your time, right? And how you decide where you will put, your time and energy with hobbies. And so I think, for me, like I said at the beginning of the session, I think about this every single day in some form or fashion. And it's not linear. We all make mistakes. There are days I look back and say, wow, that wasn't very essentialist, but that's okay. I think it's a really good reminder that this is not an absolute. And that's something I really enjoy about his work, is that it's very proactive, it's vibrant, it's multidimensional to the degree that you allow it to be.
And what I'll also say is that I think the pump is sort of primed for these conversations. I'm seeing more and more in the field some publishing and some new research around kind of this ideal worker in student affairs, and really decentering that idea and really thinking about how do we create sustainable careers in student affairs. And I think that, this is a good way to weave in that conversation, maybe with something that's already out there in the field. I know there's a book that's coming out, and I know that there are, some 3-part series that are currently being offered by NASPA on this topic, but really thinking about, how do we deconstruct maybe some of our own norms that we have within the work that we do as student affairs professionals. And whereas, it can be as micro as applying this to our own lives, which is where I hope you will start. And then as macro as really trying to think about how do we create a different experience in our field, and how do we think and critically examine some of those ideal worker mindsets. And we'll certainly share some of those resources a little bit later in the presentation too. So we're going to get to practical applications. So we really want you to try out some essentialist exercises so that you can begin determining if this maybe is for you, and if there are places where you think that you could really incorporate this in your day-to-day life, whether that's on the personal or professional level.
Yes. So take a moment and give this some thought. You see, there are 3 circles in front of us here in kind of a Venn diagram fashion. So in the upper left, the prompt is, what am I deeply passionate about? And again, this is personal. It'll be share at your own choice here and comfort. So you can take this very personally or professionally or both. But what am I deeply passionate about? Then the circle to the right of that in the upper right, what meets a significant need in the world? Right? And then the bottom circle there, what taps my talent? So take a moment, take that in, and then we'll proceed.
So once you kind of have those 3 questions answered, I think that exercise is can be a little bit hard for some of us, and maybe it comes very easily and second nature to others. But once you have those questions answered, what I think is really important for you to consider is what we're trying to have you determine through this exercise is what your highest point of contribution is. And so as you kind of filled out those 3 circles, you created your own Venn diagram of what you're passionate about, what taps your talent, and what meets a significant need in the world. Arguably what you could be paid to do as well is something that you could also add to this if you wanted in another iteration. What you're looking for is where those circles interlap and where they kind of cross over. So that middle part of your Venn diagram is your highest point of contribution, and really thinking about where is the intersection of these 3 things for me, and how does that reflect itself in my work? How does that reflect itself in my personal life? Are those things aligned? Are they not aligned? And what might I need to do to create better alignment between those 3 things? So congratulations, you've just, through this exercise, thought about what your own highest point of contribution might be. You could also think about this in the way of maybe you thought about it with your personal life. You could think about it also with your professional life. So what am I passionate about? What meets a significant need in my department? What taps my talent here? And maybe that's a way for you to start thinking about your own professional development plan. Or maybe you share this with your supervisor and talk through that with them around, what you are really passionate and excited about, where you feel like you can make an impact, where you can have the greatest amount of contribution, and how can you align some of your work to that if it's not already aligned? How can you get those experiences? And if you're getting those experiences and it feels overwhelming, then how can you what do you need to deprioritize in order to do that too? And so I think it's a really great professional development and personal development exercise to reflect on this, and it may change over time. And so maybe, even, semesterly reviewing this with yourself, maybe doing kind of your own or advance just on, your own highest point of contribution and how you've seen that play out in your work. If you enjoy journaling, these are great topics to kind of think about in terms of what am I passionate about, what taps my talent, what meets a significant need, how have I done that today, can really bring, I think, some additional meaning to the work that you do on the day-to-day, particularly as I think we all have taken on tasks that perhaps are outside of the work that we normally do. And sometimes it can be really hard to assign meaning or find meaning in that. And so I think about, when it was March and I was out there with our coordinators and we were in our biggest apartment complex pulling trash out of refrigerators that students hadn't been in for probably about a month, and how hard that work was physically and how, but what was good about that was that I was able to learn a lot about our students. I learned a lot about our students. I knew that I was helping our department. I knew I was lessening the load for our custodial and maintenance staff at a time when we didn't know a lot about the virus and we didn't really know, what we know now. And so I think that that was something that really helped me reflect on these questions day after day to think about, yeah, what tapped my talent was trying to motivate the staff as we were there, trying to bring good humor. And what was meeting a significant need in the world was really that we were serving our students. And so that was something that I think really helped me reframe it from, this is a task that I shouldn't have to do as a master's level professional, right? Which I think was the predominant mindset of many folks. I think maybe not just in where we are, but probably elsewhere around the country. But really reframing it to, this is why I'm doing it. This is the meaning for me, and being able to share that meaning with others was really helpful.
Mm-hmm. And I'll never look at raw chicken the same again after we were
I spilled
in that refrigerator. Yeah.
I know, I spilled, rotten fish on my shoes. So it was a rough day. It was hard, to think about these things, but not having these 3 questions to ask myself daily, I think means that I'm a little bit aimless in the work that I'm doing. And so I think that that's something, even if you just do it weekly, even if you just do it semesterly, really thinking about where your highest point of contribution is to bring that meaning to your work.
So this is a good recap here to think about. These are questions that you should be revisiting. This is not a one-time exercise because we change. Circumstances change, our environments change, but this is really important as you're continuing to examine your why. I would venture to say your why for being in our profession will probably not change dramatically over time, but it might be that we have to recognize that we learn and grow and change over time, and we learn new information every day, right? We're curious sources here. So it's important to keep a lens, or whatever metaphor you want to use, that is really thinking about how are you taking in some of these points, and how are you really kind of keeping, I like to think of the periscope, that weird looking thing on a submarine that does the 360 turning around to see, what's in the environment. But to think about, how could you really be questioning? How can you be thinking about that? Where are you getting your information? And I think we will move forward for the sake of time.
So, Greg in his book, we've really kind of boiled down the principles. There's so much more that he talks about that I think is really relevant to our field and to our work. But he really talks about being able to clarify, to dare, to uncommit where you can, to edit if you can, and to limit in order to, continue moving towards your highest point of contribution. You may not always be able to do that in the role that you're currently in, and we know that. I can remember what it was like to be a residence life coordinator, to be a residence director, to be a graduate student, but there were places in my life where I could exercise that type of control. And maybe it wasn't in my professional life all the time, but it was definitely in my personal life that I could do it. And looking back, I think having this framework could be really helpful too. And so what we've tried to provide you are some action statements that you could use as you think about how you might go ahead and uncommit and edit and limit some of your engagements so that you can really remain focused on your highest point of contribution and where you think you can have the greatest impact. I think it's always important to pause. I think, we are encountered with so many different questions and so many opportunities in a day, and particularly on a college campus when we have a return to normalcy. I think, you know, what I hope is that we will evaluate the things about what we're doing now that's working, and the things that we would wish to change. But I think that sometimes we just are so quick to say yes. We're so quick to give the quick yes. We want to be seen as being helpful. We want to be seen as being bought in and on board, and yes, of course, and on the bus. And that's the thing we want to be seen as. That's about our image. But what I think is really important when you adopt an essentialist perspective to your life is really pausing for a minute, really listening to what is being said and what is being asked of you, and really thinking it through and taking a pause, not just jumping in and saying yes. Because what Greg says in the book is that if it's not a clear yes, it's a no. And so really thinking about, you know, how can I pause in this moment? How can I really listen and cue in and really understand what's being asked of me before I just jump to say yes? Something you can also say is maybe a soft no or the no but. And so that also kind of connects to, no, you know what, I can't do, I'm not able to do that right now. I don't have the bandwidth, but here's what I could contribute that may also help you along in this project. What I love to do now, I think, is let me check my calendar and get back to you. Let me check to make sure I have the appropriate amount of time, the appropriate amount of energy, and the appropriate amount of bandwidth to commit to this ask that I've got. And then I think this is critical with a supervisor. And I know that when Hilary supervised me, we would often have these conversations of, yeah, you can definitely say yes. You don't always have to say no. You can say yes if you kind of have the space and the energy and you've created that for yourself. But sometimes you do have to ask, what should I deprioritize in order to do this? What should I deprioritize of what I'm already doing to make sure that I can make this work a priority and that I can do this work well for you? That has been a question that has changed the game for me, and something that was really hard for me to learn. You know, I came through, I'm a first gen student. I am a high achieving student. I graduated summa cum laude from both of my institutions, honors student, all that. It is very hard when you have a perfectionist mindset, or you're a recovering perfectionist, perhaps in the way that I am, to say the things that you see on this slide here, and we recognize that. But I think it's so important that we learn how to, and we lean into being able to do that. I think being able to say, yeah, I can do that, but what should I deprioritize? Or what could feasibly come off my plate in order for me to commit fully to this work is a really great strategy to be able to do that. And then you see two more there. While I can't commit to X at this time, I am willing to do Y. So really thinking about what of the ask could you commit to doing, and then offer that if you feel that you can follow through. And then maybe sometimes it is about, I can't do it at this present moment, but my ex-colleague might be interested. This is something that's right up their alley. This is something that they have the bandwidth for. This is something that they really want and could really want to do. And maybe I can mentor them through that to still be involved, but maybe I don't have to be the person who's doing all of the work. Maybe it's now time for me to be less of the executor and more of the mentor. And so that's something to think about too, as you think about what's next for you in your career. And that's about all we have. You know, I know we have about 2 minutes left. You know, we're happy to stay behind and entertain any thoughts, questions, concerns, outrage that you might have. The QR code that you see here is a PDF copy of our presentation. There's also 3 worksheets there that we've created that may help you as you continue in your journey around essentialism. And so those are free resources for you. We hope that you can use them, hopefully share them with your supervisor, maybe share them with your team, maybe use them as a team development opportunity. And we'd love to hear how that goes for you. And of course, we're here to be resources and to entertain any questions that you might have. But otherwise, we just want to thank you so much for choosing, of all the presentations you could have come to, choosing to come and see us today. And we just really have appreciated it. But we'll hang on in case you have questions, concerns, outrage, and otherwise, we just want you to have a fantastic time at SEAHO. Thanks for coming.
And I will share too, if anyone is on Twitter, I see him more on Twitter than anywhere else. Greg is pretty active on there. I always enjoy kind of popping on and seeing, oh, what is he tweeting about today? He has another book, Effortless, that's coming out in April, so that'll be good. So not necessarily to promote his things, but just very accessible, lots of points to ponder. But we would love to hear how this plays out for you and what you take from it. I know one of my greatest takeaways is navigating some of these seemingly simple strategies through talking and kind of vetting that with others, not for approval, but just kind of, hey, what might I be missing? Or, am I really thinking about essentialism in this way, or am I just using the term? So we would love to hear your reactions, thoughts, and stories. And thank you for making time today. And Tiffany, it's always a pleasure. But we'll
Likewise, Hilary.
see you all around SEAHO.